Greetings, Missouri Mid-South Conference. I bring you greetings as we near the end of the month of April. My goodness, where has the time gone? And my goodness, it feels as if it has been a year since the beginning of April, and our quarantine began in March. I want to share with you an update that I do so continuing to be in prayerful discernment of how to support all of our local churches in Arkansas, Memphis, and Missouri related to the COVID-19 pandemic. I am aware that in all of the 3 states, there is encouragement by the particular governors to open faith communities back up. The state of Arkansas never completely closed, and so this is continuing from that regard. The governor of Missouri has stated that churches, faith communities in Missouri can open as soon as May 1st, and my understanding is that that is the same in regards to the state of Tennessee for our Memphis UCC siblings. And so we are at that moment again in this time of unknown and liminal space with the question of, do we return back to our church buildings and property and return back to in-person church events? When is the best time to go back, and when is the best time to discern within ourselves and listen for God's wisdom about whether we continue with the phenomenal worship in the ways that we've been doing online, or we go back. As I have been sitting with as conference minister, the continued refrain that I will preface all of this with is, in the United Church of Christ, the polity wonderfully is that I, as your conference minister, have no authority to tell you whether you should reopen or whether you should stay closed in your in-person church building events. And I feel the responsibility as your conference minister to offer as much support and guidance, especially because this is an issue related to the physical health and wholeness of all of us. So I wanted to ground myself in not just statistics, which I'll share in a second, but in our sacred stories. And so for the past couple of days, I've been sitting with what are our sacred stories that shed meaning and wisdom for this moment. And I sat with the stories and the plethora of our literature that was written during the exile. The exile, you may remember, the Israelites were forced out of their land, their homeland, their homes, their faith communities were destroyed, their sense of community, their businesses were all destroyed, and they were forced into this foreign land of Babylon, where they were enslaved, and where there was this critical question of, where is God? Because for the Israelites, when they were in their homeland, God was in the temple, the synagogue. God was in that place of the temple. But when they were dislocated and removed from home and in this foreign land, the very essence of who and whose they were, that identity question of, if God is in the place of the synagogue, but our synagogue has been destroyed, and we're in exile in this new and different and foreign place. Where is God? And so there's beautiful literature and our Psalms that remind us God is not necessarily in this synagogue. God is in the tent of our dwelling. And so I began to reread Walter Brueggemann, any and everything that Dr. Brueggemann shares about the prophets and the writing and that sacred literature in the exile. And I share one piece that Dr. Brueggemann pointed us to in this time of hopelessness. Where is our sense of God and that anchor when we are in exile? Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." I'm going to pause there. It's not the joy, joy, cotton candy that we normally get, and it reflects this sense of exile and where is God in the midst of the longing to go back to Zion. What I know in my studies of the sacred scriptures is that Israel was in exile for 50 years, and there was this longing for going back home and going back to what they had known was God. So what does this have to do with us today? I want to suggest that we are in exile. We are in that place where what we have known is not where we are right now. It is not the same in terms of I want to honor the Israelites and our ancestors who have been forced out of their homes and forced into slavery and enslavement in a way that I don't want to seem to be making that comparison. But what I do want to suggest is that we are in this space of exile, and what we know in our studies of the Hebrew scriptures is that very often the Israelites in that place of exile were longing to go back home. Just let us go, let us get back there, and everything will be all right. Well, number one, what we know is that it took 50 years. And number two, what we know is that once they made it back to their homeland, it wasn't the same. And in some places, they had to start from scratch. So I share that to say that we may be in that same spiritual place of feeling exiled. For some of us, being in our homes or our apartments for now going on almost 2 months, not being able to be connected to the church building, and perhaps our sense of the presence of God that is in that church building, and the presence of God that is with us as we are in person with one another. And now that we have this permission by our state governors to go back to church and go back to home and business as usual, the temptation will be to quickly move back into our churches. I, as your conference minister, strongly suggest that all of our UCC churches in Arkansas, Memphis, and Missouri do not go back to in-person church events until at least June 1st. I know that I originally said May 15th, and that is nearing for many of us. And what I also know is that the statistics that we are getting on a daily basis show us that if we continue to stay at home and self-quarantine, that the percentage of the COVID cases and deaths will be minimal from that regard. And yet, one of the statistics shows that if we begin to return back right now, that those cases are going to increase exponentially. And so what I want to recommend, strongly suggest, is that all of our churches consider not returning back to in-person worship or church events until June 1st. I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, in all three of the states, what I am aware of is that even though we've been given permission to go back to our in-person church events, our schools have been canceled for the remainder of this school year, which says to me, if our states are saying that it's not within the best interest of our students, our children, our teachers, and our faculty and staff, if our states are saying that it is best for them to stay home, then why is it okay for all of our faith communities to go back in this time? I am aware that many different camps and many different organizations have already canceled their summer camps, and we will be sharing that information with you about Camp Moval very soon on Saturday at the conference annual gathering. And I know that we have a responsibility in this moment to our church members, to our neighbors, and to the most vulnerable in our community that we may never know, but because we are interacting and engaging with one another, we are putting more and more people at risk. And what I also know is that our healthcare facilities in many of our rural areas, which is where a number of our UCC churches are located in Arkansas and in Missouri, our rural areas, many of them have closed their hospitals even before the pandemic because of financial reasons. So if we have a sharp increase in COVID cases, what does that do to your communities where your hospital may have already closed, and the impact that that puts on the area hospitals and other healthcare facilities? I would share with you and with your leaders that as you prayerfully consider, just as I have prayerfully considered, my suggestion to remain closed until June 1st, I encourage your church council leaders and your pastors to think about three things. Number one, look at the statistics of the COVID cases and deaths that we have as of right now. One of the links that I will give to you in the e-courier is a link to the chart of future predicting and the statistics of that related to whether we stay at home and continue to stay at home, or if we have an increase in people going back to churches and things like that. So I would first say, look at the statistics. Number two, I would say, think about your and talk to your county's Department of Health. So the states have said this is what we suggest, but no one knows better about your community than your Department of Health. And your county's Department of Health will be able to give you more boots on the ground wisdom as to what their recommendations are. And if they say we are seeing an increase in cases, then my recommendation would be to seriously consider not returning back to worship and in person until June 1st. Third, I would invite you to consider those who are members that you know if the church doors are unlocked, they are going to be there. And are they okay physically? Can they handle if there were an outbreak of COVID? Your senior adults, those with immune concerns, you're young, those who are persons of color, because we're seeing the statistics higher for persons of color that contract COVID and the death rate, and those who are vulnerable in community, who are poor, who don't have health insurance, and those things. That should be a part of your discernment as well. The fourth piece that I will say is, whatever your church leadership decides to do, create a plan. Go ahead and start working on it right now, and put together a plan for whatever you do. And that plan is going to include, I would recommend the following. Number one, if we return back, how will we separate people per the guidelines of our county and state? And how will we reinforce these guidelines of separation at in-church on-site functions? Number two, what aspects of worship must be changed right now? No passing of the peace, no offering plate, no communion, no fellowship or the pad saying who's coming on. Number three, how will we clean all parts of the building in an in-depth way to ensure the safety of all who enter our church? Number four, if members or anyone else contracts COVID as a result of being at our church, will we postpone in-person church events, and what does that look like? This plan, I believe, your church leadership has got to talk through all of these pieces so that if and when these issues arise, that you have thought through those pieces to know what to do. My friends, we are in exile. And as much as I wish that I could tell you that we are going back home tomorrow, my recommendation is that we not consider and we not go back to our churches and our church on-site places, locations, until at least June 1st. In the name of God who creates us, the Christ who teaches us to love beyond our imagination, and the Holy Spirit that brings us together in this moment, my love and my prayers are with all of you. Amen.